And we're live on Facebook. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. My word, Kenobi, has been a love letter to everything I love about Star Wars. And with me to talk about the Kenobi finale are two other lawyers and a Space Force officer. So, Christine Peak, who is in her Imperial garb from our Stormtrooper Defective Body Armor mock trial that was still my favorite mock trial to do. Bethany Lambton, who is in Space Force and does not speak for the United States government and is here purely for fun on her own free time and is in no way at work. So she's at home and it's totally cool and legal. And also Stantola Field, who we keep going on adventures together. And it's been a lot of fun this summer. So from Star Wars Celebration, we're now gearing up for Comic-Con. It's gonna rock. And before we nerd out on all the legal issues, let's go around the horn alphabetically on by first name on what did the finale mean to you, Bethany?
Oh my goodness. For me, Kenobi was a slow burn of a show. I've always loved the character of Obi-Wan. I love this time frame. It's set in the galaxy, but I had a hard time really feeling like I was fully into this series, and somehow the finale just brought everything together. I laughed, I cried multiple times, maybe, possibly. And it was so moving and so incredible to see Obi-Wan kind of come into his own again. But yeah, I'll stop gushing.
Christine?
So I think what I liked best about the final episode was the fight between Obi-Wan and Vader. That was a really great combat sequence, and I felt there was a lot of character development happening. I felt like I met Vader on another level that I hadn't previously seen before. I love what they did with the voice at the end of the fight, where it's kind of going in between the Darth Vader voice and Anakin's voice. So that was definitely a favorite for me. I will say I loved getting to see Reva in a fight scene as well, but I was left at the end wanting a little bit more Reva when they were going through at the end and doing the sort of the denouement for all the characters. I would have liked to see a little bit more for her. I'll stop there.
Steven?
Great. Yeah, I totally agree. The fight sequence kind of pushed all the buttons that we thought were pushed in A New Hope in 1977. But that fight scene between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan is just like a whole other level in the season finale, with like the lifting rocks and the crevasse, and it was totally next level, very extra, and I loved it. But I will say, I think my favorite moment was the little conversation between Obi-Wan and Leia at the very end, because that just kind of captures to me what Star Wars is. It's about giving good values to children and giving them the idea and empowering children with their imaginations, with their looking forward. You won't always be 10, as Obi-Wan says. And so that it's time for you to start thinking about what you're going to be when you grow up and how you can use your gifts for good. I just loved that, and cry. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, I have 3 nieces, and yeah, that was like, oh God, that's so adorable. And need to FaceTime all of them and see how they're doing. So they did that really well, and that young actress is amazing with how emotive she is, and they capture the spirit of Leia, and that kid rocks with how they do it. So it was all very good. So yeah, very, very happy. I also think that lightsaber fight might have been the best live action ever. I will say that Kenobi is my favorite character and then Imwe from Rogue One a second, because I like Question of Faith. And those two really hit that well for me. So I was extremely happy with this. Watching the first two episodes, I did at Celebration with Christine on my iPad, which was tethered to her phone. So that way we had internet for it. So that adventure and like taking 45 minutes in order to be able to watch it was cool. So I have nothing but joy for this. And I was fine with the slow burn because Tatooine always stops slow. So anyway, let's get legal and military as we get into the many issues from this. So let's talk about the legality of the Imperial pursuit of the refugees on the path. I'm just going to go out there and say that this is a crime against humanity because you're hunting refugees. It's bad. Anyone else want to tag in on why this is bad?
Kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
That's just bad. Yeah.
I feel like it's in a how to be an evil bad guy 101 handbook somewhere.
Yeah, let's go kill children. Like that never, ever means you're in the right. And even, yeah, so again, all bad, all very bad. But let's get into the next issue that gets the Mortal Kombat of Vader and Kenobi. So Christine, being the research hawk that you are, you looked up at all the law of dueling. Walk us through that, just the good old days.
I actually think that might have been Stephen, but I'm not sure. But
it
there were ST initials. But I did take a look at some California law on how mutual combat, I think was your prompt. So I did take a look at some California law on how mutual combat plays into the right to self-defense. So I will defer to Stephen if he wants to start talking about dueling, though, because it is a duel, and so worth a comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that situation between them just looked to me like there were two people who had a score to settle, which made me think of a duel. But Christine, you dug up some really interesting stuff about mutual combat and victim compensation, which seemed like a really cool thing to talk about first.
Well, so I saw there was a regulation in there that relates to this scheme that California has for compensating victims. I think the real action here, though, is that you've got a fight going on, and the question about what's the legal significance of mutual combat, especially if Obi-Wan is the initial aggressor, as he seems to be. I think you could maybe make an argument for either of them being the initial aggressors, but I just think the argument is much better for Obi-Wan being the initial aggressor. Since he seems to keep finding excuses to go one-on-one with Vader, like all of these different scenarios. He did it in episode 5, and then all of a sudden in episode 6, oh my gosh, I've got to go fight Vader. I'm going to come up with some reason why this is imperative that I do this now. So we have this fight. And if Obi-Wan is either the initial aggressor or he's engaged in mutual combat, that could potentially take away his right to argue self-defense. And so Vader comes out of this fight looking pretty worse for wear. He's definitely wearing it worse at the end than Obi-Wan is. And so there's a risk perhaps that in a system where Obi-Wan would be held accountable for this, he could be liable for criminal assault and battery against is it the commander-in-chief of the Imperial military at this point? So pretty important figure in the Imperial military. And so there's some rules about this. So if you're starting a fight, or if the person is engaging in mutual combat, then they only have a right to self-defense if they, number one, actually and in good faith tried to stop fighting, and number two, indicated by word or conduct to the opponent in a way that a reasonable person would understand that they wanted to stop fighting, and that they had stopped fighting. And in the case of mutual combat, actually gave the opponent a chance to stop fighting. And if you do those things and your opponent continues to fight, then at that point, you may regain the right to self-defense.
Yeah, that all sounds right.
I actually think there's an argument that that ignores the Imperial pursuit of the refugees. Like, and that's part of the problem with that, is what Kenobi does is to divert the Imperial forces hunting down and killing all the refugees. So I don't think that makes him the aggressor. I'm like, yeah, he goes and waits on the planet. Vader could have kept pursuing him in the Star Destroyer and to shoot him out of the sky. Instead, he goes, I'm going to land and take him on one, which does put this very squarely in the duel category. But I have a tough time with Kenobi as the aggressor because it's a sacrifice play so others may live. But I agree, it's complicated and it's not a normal fact pattern we would want in civil society.
I do think there is an argument to be made on both sides for one being the initial aggressor, right? Like you could argue the case that it's really Vader and the Imperials that are the aggressor. But I think it's hard to get around agreement to fight, right? Like fight is mutual combat if it's mutual consent. And here you've got Vader saying, have you come to destroy me? And Obi-Wan says, I will do what I must. And he actually draws first. And then Vader says, you will die. It seems like there's an agreement there.
I mean, granted, this is I'm not messing around. I'm tired of you killing. I saw you snap that kid's neck. I'm tired of this. I'm done. So I mean, I get that, but this is, when we did a panel with the Colorado Attorney General, he made a comment about Thor beheading Thanos as there are some things that just exceed the jurisdiction of a court. Something along those lines, and this could be falling into that category. But Bethany, from the military officer in you, we have the Grand Inquisitor trying to keep Vader on mission, and it almost looks like he rolls his eyes when it's like, no, we're going after Kenobi. From what's your reaction on that? Just as a professional.
If I were at the Grand Inquisitor, or if I were a commander's executive officer charged with helping that commander achieve their goals and their unit's goals, I would be frustrated because I would want to know what it was about Kenobi that made him so much more important as a singular individual than this entire group of rebels and traitors, essentially, from the Imperial perspective. So if there is something that Darth Vader knows about Kenobi in terms of senses through the Force that this is the person that's the biggest threat to the dark side, essentially, then that is something that the Inquisitors should be told about. So it kind of goes back to the debate around Poe in some ways, which all of you are extremely familiar with, but it behooves military leadership to bring in those that execute the mission, whatever the mission may be, into the reason behind the mission. Because otherwise you have people who are trying to execute a commander's vision, not really knowing exactly what that vision is. So there's definitely communication issues, and the Grand Inquisitor seems to, with his unspoken attitude, and even some of his little bit of spoken attitude, seems to think that this is purely personal, which means that the Grand Inquisitor and the other Inquisitors who follow him may not be as fully on board as Vader would want them to be. Because yes, they're all in the military. Yes, Darth Vader is incredibly powerful, but if you don't get that buy-in from your team, they're not going to do a good job. And
I would add that when Kenobi leaves, that Star Destroyer is gone. They went, see ya. And does that mean the Grand Inquisitor is filing a report with the Emperor? And that's why Vader gets a performance improvement plan at the end of the episode? So he's basically having an HR meeting with the Emperor at the end. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I was curious about that too, because it seems to me that the Emperor is so calculating and so methodical and thorough about making sure that the Jedi are extinguished, to kind of prevent any sort of hope, which is a theme running through all the Star Wars movies, preventing those seeds from taking root. So I was so surprised that it seemed uncharacteristic of him to be like, just let that one go. It's fine. Focus, Vader.
it's like, hey, buddy, I know you've done a lot of real good work. I also know he cut off 3 of your limbs. But dig in, big picture. So there's that feeling. But I guess this duel, man, that was everything. Like that was everything I've wanted to see in a Star Wars lightsaber fight, all done at once. So lots of good stuff there. Let's talk about contracts, which is the thing that most people, immediately think of when it comes to Star Wars. And we have Haja's promise to Obi-Wan to take Leia home. Is that an enforceable performance contract? And Christine or Stephen, which one of you would like to take that first?
I suspect we have similar ideas.
Contracts, yeah. Well, I'm not a transactional attorney, never was. So I'm probably the last person to chime in on this. But Christine, do you have more insight?
Sure. So I'll try to go over the basics. So for purposes of California law, well, first let's go over the sequence. So Obi-Wan says, "You must promise me that you'll get her home," and Haja says, "You have my word." But then even Haja himself concedes that, well, maybe actually my word's not worth very much. So what happens if he just doesn't do it? Can Obi-Wan say anything about this? So to prove the existence of a contract, Obi-Wan, if this were contested, Obi-Wan would have to show that the terms were clear enough that the parties could each understand what they were supposed to do. And here it's pretty simple, take her home. So that's one thing. That the parties agreed to the terms of the contract. That seems also, pretty clear. Haja says, "I give you my word." And Obi-Wan tells him, "You've got to promise me." And so maybe, you can argue about which is offer and which is acceptance, but it seems like we're agreed on what's supposed to happen here. So I think the next thing is really the issue, right? So the parties have to agree to give each other something of value. So a promise to do something or not to do something that has some value. And here, Haja's promise to get Leia home is probably good enough on his end, but what is Obi-Wan really promising to do for Haja? Does he really agree to give him anything of value? And I think that you can argue that he does, because Obi-Wan is agreeing to attempt to draw Vader off so that Haja and the others can escape. That benefits others besides Haja, but maybe that doesn't really matter because Haja still gets the benefit. He gets to escape, Leia gets to go home, and Obi-Wan gets whatever security there is to be had in knowing that Haja's taking her home. On the other hand, just to argue the other side a little bit, it's not something that Haja specifically requested Obi-Wan to do. Obi-Wan really wants to do it no matter what. And Haja is really the one sort of accommodating that request. And so, so maybe that's not quite enough. But even if it's not, Obi-Wan might think about whether the equitable doctrine of promissory estoppel might apply. If he relied on Haja's word to his detriment in deciding to leave the ship and leave Leia and pursue Vader instead, and his reliance was reasonable, then perhaps he could have some argument on another theory. But yeah, I think he has an argument that Haja's got to be held to his word.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a valid performance contract, because when the consideration is, I will take on the Dark Lord of the Sith, that's more than a peppercorn. So that's a big swing. And saying you get to take a little girl home. Okay. Seems to be less risk, even though I wouldn't want Leia mad at me, but still there seems to be less risk there with them. So yeah, I think it's enforceable. And again, it's also one of the stellar Star Wars moments of, like good enough for me, and which is just that faith in people and redemption and people getting a second chance to move ahead. With
So I'm
that,
not.
oh yes, Bethany.
So I'm
please.
not a legal expert, but would the enforceability of the contract be able to be considered if, like, considering that Leia is a minor and therefore there'd be like an element of neglect if the contract weren't adhered to?
The child safety aspect is well done identifying that. So a couple arguments here. One could be that Kenobi does have basically a really broad permission slip to keep Leia alive to get her home. And the parents knew that there was risk because she had been kidnapped. So there's like, this isn't normal. Like Uncle Ben is not taking little Leia out to the museum. Like this is go rescue my daughter so she doesn't die. Different level of care there. He is entrusted with her safety. So ensuring that her safety is maintained, I think is paramount to him. And it's his legal duty to make sure that that happens, whether it's Haja or Roken. I do think Roken would be a better bet, but Haja does seem pretty motivated by guilt or inspiration to get Leia home. Stephen, any thoughts on like the uncle level here?
Yeah, that's a great observation, Bethany. Because obviously people contract with other adults for the caregiving of children all the time. So there's nothing necessarily wrong about that. But the question that raises to me though is whether Ben or Obi-Wan had the delegated authority from the Organas to make decisions about trusting third parties with the care of Leia. That seems a little less on the up and up than maybe sort of an ordinary, parent going to a daycare center and saying, I will give you this amount of money if you take care of my child. So yeah, it's a great observation. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, it comes up again and again too, right? Because he's constantly, just through the difficult circumstances, having to hand her off to various people, right? But handing her off to somebody like Tala versus handing her off to Roken versus handing her off to Haja, there's a difference in the reliability of the caretaker there. That maybe he should think more carefully about that. In the estoppel argument, maybe it would go to the reasonableness of his reliance, whereas the fact that not getting her home could prove disastrous would maybe go to the injury, the detriment of it all. If Haja had refused and nobody else stepped up, what would he have done?
Yeah, interesting.
I still think she would have gone on her own. Just thinking back to
that's probably what would have happened.
Yeah.
Just thinking back to, she did get out of those bonds and we don't know how. So, and Lola was non-operational. So the kids got skills. Pretty sure she could get back to Alderaan and go like, hey mom, hey dad. Like, and there wouldn't be any, that's our kid. That's how she was.
Well, at least Darth Vader and the Grand Inquisitor wouldn't be on her trail anymore, because you could also argue Obi-Wan is having fewer and fewer options as time goes on. Every time he's trying to intersect with the Imperials and essentially keep her from getting slaughtered along with a bunch of other people.
Yeah, it's an interesting character study because he's willing to sacrifice himself multiple times, but it's not necessarily, it's like most of those are guilt born until the end when it seems to be more altruistic. Because when he's holding up all the rocks on top of him, and it's oh, look, it's connections that save him. Uh, my read on why Jedis are just messed up because it's okay to have a human connection. It's thinking about his friends' kids that he feels responsible for, that inspire him to go into whoop-ass mode to a degree that we've never seen him do with, I'm just going to throw a bunch of rocks at you all at once and do twirls with the lightsaber from behind my back and then crush your respirator. That's my mood. Then I'll let you live. So yeah, he changes. He's willing to sacrifice himself, but it changes as it goes on. With that, I want to talk about something I remember back from law school, the difference between contract law in the United States and Europe, because we have, what's the question for the enforceability of Kenobi's promise to Leia to return? Because there's some issues with promises to children can be enforceable, and that gets weird fast. You know, like if it's, I will get junior shoes versus I'll come back alive. So very, very different. But he says to her, I promise. And he, at the same time, he doesn't give the 10-year-old a blaster. He knows not to do that. So like there's that. So let's talk about contract enforceability. And so, Stephen, was it you or was it Christine?
I looked into it briefly. It's weirdly, I have a very specific memory of studying this in law school. I kind of remember exactly where I was when I was reading these cases and looking into it. It's so funny, I don't know why, but there's a couple topics that just resonate with the deepest neurons of my brain. But I remember studying that you can make contracts with children. And they can be enforceable. However, because children may not appreciate the consequences of their contract formation, any contract with a minor is voidable by the child. So any agreement you make with a kid, with some exceptions, the kid can just walk away from if they change their mind. So obviously that kind of undermines the willingness of a lot of people to make arrangements with children. So the law actually, in this weird way, limits children's abilities to walk away from certain contracts to kind of protect them, which is a weird way to think about it. But contracts for necessities that children enter into, like housing or for food or clothes, sometimes cars, if it's something that's necessary for their existence, those contracts can be binding and not voidable by the child, so that people will actually provide those services to make sure kids are safe if they're needing to contract on their own. So as a general matter, Obi-Wan could create a contract with Leia, but a question, sort of whether this is an enforceable contract in the way that there's consideration and detriment on both sides. Leia has a habit throughout her entire history of saying, come back, or bring them back, or she's always the center of the group, and she's always sending people out or reaching out to bring people in. And so this is just maybe one of the first examples when she's like, you will come back to me. And so I don't know if that's so much of a contract or so much of as a princess's command, but either way, I think it's very binding on Obi-Wan, at least in his heart.
Christine?
Everyone's just afraid of saying no to her.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, even as a 10-year-old, she's so imperious.
Yeah, I'd just be like, yes, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Absolutely, those little eyes.
More ice cream? Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I think whether viewed as a contract or whether viewed as a royal command, the key issue is that it would be disaffirmed potentially by Leia, not necessarily by Obi-Wan, assuming that indeed a contract was created. And so I think that's probably where the argument would lie. But I mean, maybe another way to look at it would be whether Obi-Wan has some kind of agreement with her parents, with Bail and Bail, to bring her home. Or yet another way to look at it can be just whether he regardless of the contractual issues involved, there may be done, but whether there's a duty to bring them, the duty to bring her home that is independent of any kind of contractual duty, but that stems from the special relationship that he has with the two Skywalker children.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially like going to check and make sure that she actually did get home safely and that he's not misinformed or hearing Imperial propaganda or something.
Right, yeah, which he does at the end. He didn't just, leave off and say, oh, I thought Hadja was gonna do it.
Right.
Yeah, and he did have to return the droid, which is, she looks really happy to see him, and that expression is super sweet. Then she looks happier to see her droid. I don't know how to feel about that, because that was like, who do you love more, kid? Like your little flying droid or the dude who saved you multiple times? So like there was that reaction.
I mean, any adult who's ever given a kid a gift knows that feeling. Like that's,
yes,
I'm right here. Like, yeah.
Validate me. But
yeah.
She does. I mean, like it's super, super sweet. And those are all like, it's like, how do we top Grogu? I got an idea. And they did a really good job. It also sets the tone for Leia being very empathic. So before the promise, we see her comforting a kid who's scared with Lola. Very sweet. And she talks about how, it's distracting the kid from being scared. She's scared too. Let's jump forward 9 years to A New Hope, where they've just escaped the Death Star and Luke saw Kenobi die. Leia saw her planet blow up. She also saw Kenobi die, and she's the one comforting Luke. I think that goes to her just being who she is with, if somebody's sad, she will comfort them, despite the fact that she's just saw like 6 billion people die, and the dude who saved her times when she was 10. So there's, I think that just part of her character, and I think that fills in some of those gaps. And does she ever tell Luke that I spent more time with Ben Kenobi than you did? My adventure was super awesome. So like, how do they play that off later? Is that just a little secret? Does she and Han say so we're never going to talk about this? So yeah, it's a strange performance contract. But no, we get into the other fun part of Star Wars, and that's the duty to rescue. Kenobi senses Luke's in danger because Reva's on a killing spree. And he senses it right through the Force and doesn't hesitate to go back to Tatooine. Did Kenobi have a duty to go save him? And I put in some material for duty to rescue, and I can see one of you did as well. Who wants to jump in first? Christine, I know that smirk.
No. It's I don't have to jump in, because I feel like we did talk a little bit about some of these rules when we talked about episodes 1 and 2. We were just talking about them with respect to Leia instead of with respect to Luke, and so I feel like I kind of have a sense of where I would land on it, and it's similar to where I would land with Leia. So, we can reiterate the general rules, right? So there's no general duty to rescue, but a defendant but may owe a duty to protect a plaintiff from a third party if there's some kind of special relationship between with the plaintiff. And I think that's probably the strongest path here to finding a duty to rescue. We talked a little bit about another rule whereby the general rule that there's no duty to rescue does not apply when the person has caused another person to be put in peril, and that caused the injuries. So, I think you could argue either of those. because Obi-Wan entrusted his communication device with Bail's message on it to Haja, who dropped it. So there is a sense in which Obi-Wan has caused Luke to be in the peril under the literal language of some of that case law that talks about that exception to the rule. It was probably negligent to entrust the device, at least without deleting the content on it. Since he's already read the message, he doesn't really need it anymore. Certainly there were other parties who might have been negligent. Maybe Bail was negligent for sending it without using some kind of code word to refer to the information that eventually reaches Riva. But that may not matter so much, that others were negligent if what Obi-Wan did was a substantial factor in causing Luke to be put in that position.
Christine, do you have a sense of like how long that substantial factor timeline stretches? Because it seems like at some point it gets so attenuated that there's no, this chain of events that you may have set into motion days earlier ultimately put someone in peril. And I'm wondering, like, if there's, you know, sort of across the galaxy, how maybe a day or two, I wonder how the law would treat that kind of distance.
Right, or Haja simply dropping it. I mean, is
Yeah.
that some kind of supervening force that the causal chain?
Right, and you know, in some sense, Obi-Wan failed to neutralize Riva, but at the same time, Riva is obviously acting in ways that are very unlawful. So, so it's how responsible is Obi-Wan for that conduct, of course. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
So, Bethany, is Riva AWOL at this point in time, or does Vader trying to execute her, like absolve her of like having to report for duty? So she's now free of Imperial service.
She's been terminated.
Yeah. So I actually was looking at this part of the episode, both from Obi-Wan's perspective and from Riva's perspective, as essentially they both are/were military officers. So regardless of any civil legal responsibility they might have for their actions, if you view Obi-Wan Kenobi as still a general in the rightful republic, and you view the Empire as an illegitimate government that was enacted via a coup, then Obi-Wan actually has a duty to his mission. And so it's a bit tenuous because the Republic is no longer in power. The Jedi were initially meant to be peacekeepers, but they slowly evolved into being military officers somehow. And so that he's in a tricky place, but I actually see him as someone who is charged with a mission, and not only charged with the mission, a mission he willingly accepted. And so if he just gave up on that mission, I would say that that's a dereliction of duty and conduct unbecoming of an officer. For Riva, similarly, are you seeing it from the Imperial perspective or from the legitimate but non-existent Republic government at this point? From the military perspective, it really doesn't matter whether or not you're going to be court-martialed or anywhere from discharge from military to executed. If you're AWOL, you're AWOL. And they will hunt you down, rightfully so. So if Riva could ever become a part of the resistance, then she could say that, hey, I've joined with the legitimate government. This is the right action. These are the correct people who should be in power. And we're working to restore that. But at this point, she's essentially a rogue actor who is AWOL from the Imperial military.
One comparison could be Vichy French after France surrendered to the Nazis, because de Gaulle was, I'm in London and I'm not quitting and I want my country back. And Kenobi's kind of in that De Gaulle category. Even if I just got to lay low and not get killed and make sure that 2 kids don't die. Like that's his call to service right now. So he's not doing radio free, force users. It's a very different situation of exile's the wrong term, but they're waiting and they're doing their part for a better tomorrow. That said, it's really hard to go. I know she's going to go kill a kid. Now, doing this research, I found something near and dear to my heart, something about sailors, which could also be merchant seamen. But the rule states whether a seaman falls or jumps into the water, the duty to rescue arises the instant he goes overboard. So that's nice in my feeling, that go save him. You're not supposed to. You got to make an effort. So anyway, just kind of a fun little footnote for duty to rescue analysis. Stephen, I believe you raised this issue. Was Owen justified shooting first at Riva under the self-defense and defense of others? Doctor?
I don't think that was me, but happy to chime in. Was that maybe?
So Christine, was that you then?
It was.
Okay.
But I see the note in the outline here, and I did not add the note, so I will let someone else go first.
Okay, so I brought in the castle doctrine. So self-defense and defense of others goes along the lines of, if you have reasonably justifiable fear that someone's going to use lethal force against you, you can use lethal force against them. Now, there are all kinds of caveats to this. Let's look at Owen's situation. He interacted with Riva before. She saw him cut off a woman's hand. He knows she has some rage issues. She threatened him, weapon drawn, and he stared her down. He knows she is super dangerous. And Xday was the dead Jedi named Nari hanging out in the street for all to see. So those are all the reasons to go like, I fear for my safety. When it comes to self-defense in your home, if somebody's like in your home, you don't have a duty to retreat at that point. Now, you could still have a question about, and this is where states can vary, say Texas versus most of the other ones, that there are those who go like, well, if they were on my property, so I shot him. It's like, no. Like, if you see somebody like taking the nuts off your car, that doesn't give you legal justification to shoot them. No, like you're not supposed to shoot just a trespasser, because that could just be someone going like, hey, I'm lost, I need directions. Riva's entered the homestead, lightsaber drawn, and Owen's informed that she's after them. Owen has lots of background information. I think he's justified in shooting first. It's part castle doctrine, it's part reasonable fear, and that you don't need to wait for her to take the first swing because the lightsaber is out. Christine, your thoughts on this?
I agree. I think however you analyze it, it comes out in favor of Owen. California has a penal code section 198.5 that actually provides for a presumption under somewhat similar circumstances, right? So that section says that any person using force intended or likely to cause death or great bodily injury within his or her residence, so Owen, shall be presumed to have held a reasonable fear of imminent peril of death or great bodily injury to self, family, or a member of the household when that force is used against another person, so Riva, not a member of the family or household who unlawfully and forcibly enters, which she did, or has unlawfully and forcibly entered the residence and the person using the force knew or had reason to believe that the unlawful and forcible entry occurred. So I think whether you rely on that section, or whether you just rely on the facts that show the reasonableness of his belief that she's coming to kill Luke and him and Beru, I think that he is got a valid reason to use deadly force in self-defense.
It's hard to argue the other way when she's brandishing a weapon inside his house. That's a pretty justifiable reason to expect or fear imminent bodily injury for sure.
Yeah, he doesn't actually shoot her until she takes the lightsaber out.
Yeah. And the only thing I was wondering too is that how widely do you suppose that those little stun rings are in like the setting weapons for stun? Is that sort of a military application, do you suppose, like a law enforcement application? Do you think that kind of consumer weaponry has those settings? Not that you would necessarily want to stun Reva, but
less lethal weaponry available.
Yeah, exactly.
Civilians.
Yeah.
Well, people can buy tasers. So you think you could have a blaster that has a stun setting for home defense.
Mhm.
And that might turn into an issue of, proportionality, that I saw her like cut a lady's hands off. I really didn't want to wait to see if stun was going to work on her.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
He does. First off, this really makes A New Hope sadder in seeing their charred corpses. Like it now has more of a gut punch because we've seen them as good parents.
Mm-hmm.
I like Beru scolding Owen about Ben's gone. Well, whose fault's that?
Yeah.
That sounds like he's going to sleep on the couch if he lives. Like that doesn't. I mean, doghouse type scenario right there. But
have you guys seen the Beru memes on the internet where it's like no one and then Beru like holding two shotguns? So it's essentially like it's a whole series of memes where it's basically like at the drop of a hat Beru shows up with like 5 different weapons ready to go. Yeah.
Very Linda Hamilton. So just doing her best Sarah Connor. Yes,
oh yeah.
So she puts vegetables in a blender and she's packing heat. So like that's just the way to think of her. And
just a frontier mom.
Yeah.
Frontier packing mama. So good for her. It's but yeah, it's because I rewatched A New Hope. It's like, God, this really is a bigger bummer than I remember when I was 4. So a lot there.
I'm looking forward to. I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to a Star Wars rewatch in light of Kenobi, because I've heard from good friends that it really does land A New Hope. That is, it lands very differently in light of Kenobi and adds a lot of depth in the ways that when you have an interconnected universe like this, you hope that the motivations and the characterizations deepen and have more richness to them. And I can see that happening for Star Wars for sure.
Yeah, the show, I think, impacted people at an emotional level to a degree that many were uncomfortable with it. Like, I think a lot of the critiques online that I've seen, anything from as dismissive as like, Obi-Wan was just a pansy. That's one comment I'm thinking of, or I don't like seeing him so like down and afraid and everything. But I think that's a reflection of like we're shown another side of the universe and another side of these characters that we've known for a long time. And I mean, how would we respond to the Empire taking over someone like Darth Sidious being the ruler of the known universe, essentially? Like it, in some ways, it reflects well on our current events of anything from seeing Russia invade Ukraine to any recent events and whatever your opinions may be. But we're seeing an uncomfortable reflection of human beings really struggling, and that brings a level of gravitas to the original trilogy.
To not have your faith completely shattered, for him to go like, we lost. And his plan was, I just need to stay alive. I'm a butcher now, and I need to make sure Luke Skywalker lives. Like, that's his, he still stays on mission, but he's clearly broken from the experience. And it would be really difficult not to be. But he finds his focus and he comes back. Like, this past week's been kind of rough with Supreme Court opinions and doing some really horrific things. We're seeing a justice openly attack substantial due process and listing cases that give civil rights protections, saying we should look at these again. That freaks people out, but it also gets people to get organized and to go, no, you say we have to vote, we'll turn out. And again, that's one of those messages about Star Wars. People do try to show up to do the right thing. So there's hope doesn't die. We rise up. Which brings us to Reva. And I'm so glad that Reva lived. When Rise of Skywalker ended and it's like, hey, we'll kill Ben Solo. It's like, seeking atonement's far more interesting after doing some really horrific things. And death is the easy way out to go, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about how do you go on with, people died because of me, and I'm just going to immediately die and we won't have to worry about it. Reva survives, has guilt, makes the conscious decision for, I'm not going to become a child killer, and takes Luke home in a way that doesn't break canon because Luke never sees a lit lightsaber. He just sees his aunt sucker punch Reva, which is glorious. But that raises all kinds of issues with how do you defend her? And so one from the legal side of it, and then the spiritual side of it is atonement for sins. And because she committed more than a few, but just to list the crimes to defend her, it was attempted murder of the bartender, battery of Nari, the Jedi, not the lawyer, maiming a woman whose hand was cut off, kidnapping Leia, attempted murder of the Grand Inquisitor, attempted murder of Vader, attempted murder of Luke Skywalker, and just torturing the hell out of Kenobi, raking him over the fire. And so, yeah.
That's just the stuff we saw. Like, who knows what else she did in her rise to become Grand Inquisitor.
Yeah, she, in like the interrogation of Leia, it's like, I'm going to kidnap a kid who's royalty, and now I'm going to try to intimidate her and say like, hey, put her in the rack to be tortured. So how do you defend that? Christine, you got the most trial experience out of all of us. This seems to be a job for you. So.
When life hands you an seemingly impossible case. When I saw this question, I was like, is Josh trying to kill us? Should we try him with attempted murder? Like seven alleged crimes here, and 4 of them are attempts.
He's a bad man.
We're going to be here till tomorrow. Right. Okay. Well, we've got 4 attempts. So we could start by talking about attempts. I think the fact that the attempts are mainly completed, I think, before you would get to a lot of the defenses that she might have. Just to briefly go over, so under California law, to be liable for attempt, she would have had to have taken at least one direct step towards killing another person, which in all of these instances she does. I mean, there's not much there's not much to argue there. I mean, maybe the bartender, you could say, well, you have to have specific intent. Maybe you could say her specific intent wasn't to kill him because she somehow knew Nari was going to stop him, but I don't really think that's a very strong argument. Because what if she was wrong about Nari? I mean, then the guy would have just been killed. So part of the difficulty with attempt is that, and I was thinking of this mainly with respect to Luke, is that even if she abandons her attempt to kill him before actually killing him, that doesn't really get her out of trouble under the California law. If she's a person who attempts to commit murder is still guilty, even if after taking a direct step, they abandon that effort, because the crime is complete once the intent is formed and the direct step is taken. At that point, if she abandons, she can only abandon the substantive crime of murder. She can't go back and undo the attempt part of it. And so that's sort of a difficulty right out of the gate. We had talked a little bit earlier in our discussion of episodes 1 and 2 about whether the common practice of torturing the inquisitors before in order to get them to become inquisitors, could lead to an insanity defense. And I think that's the most viable option I could come up with for Riva, because I think so to qualify for that defense, she would have to have, at the time she committed all of these crimes, had a mental disease or defect. And then 2, because of that disease or defect, she had to have been incapable of knowing or understanding the nature or quality of her act, or incapable of knowing or understanding that the act was morally or legally wrong. So I think on the first prong, we've got some really strong evidence that she does have a mental disease or defect, even though we don't specifically know her situation, whether she was tortured. There's really strong evidence that the series shows us about trauma from Order 66, right? She has dissociative flashbacks, 2 of which occur in the scenes where she's committing the attempts to murder. She witnessed a mass murder. She was hiding with dead bodies and watched them grow cold. The fact that the traumatic events occurred when she was very young probably made them have an even greater impact on her. At one point, she says that the braver you seem, the more afraid you are. And I learned that at a very young age. And she may have a bit of survivor's guilt going on as well. At one point, she commented that she tried to help, but she was just too weak. And so all of that, I think, adds up to some type of post-traumatic stress disorder, or something that would probably qualify as having a mental disease or defect. And then the question would be, well, does that disease or defect make her incapable of knowing what she was doing at the time? And I think part of the difficulty is that even though she has those flashbacks, the crime of attempted murder is already complete before she suffers them. And that's part of the problem with trying to argue that she didn't understand the nature or quality of what she was doing. So if it would be one thing if she had no designs on revenge on Vader and he just approached her while she was in the middle of the flashback, and because of the flashback, she thought it was Anakin Skywalker coming to execute Order 66 and kill her, and so she had to try to kill him right away or something like that. But that's not exactly what's going on here. So I think if that doesn't really work because of the timing, you might be left trying to argue that, well, the trauma during her formative years was so great that she didn't understand that kidnapping, maiming, and attempting to kill all these people is wrong, because due to her trauma, she had developed this delusional worldview where killing Vader is the highest good, and any step towards that goal is also good. And there's some indication that that's the case, right? Owen asks her what she wants, and she says justice, which could indicate that she really does genuinely believe that kidnapping and killing one of Anakin's children would be just. It's a tough argument, but I think, if she's your client and there's facts that could possibly support that defense, you have no reason to believe those facts are wrong. Like, you have a duty to at least try for it for her.
I think going at it as an affirmative defense perspective is the right way to go. I think it's the only way to go, because she has years of planning and carrying out actions. So it's not like this was, a Tuesday afternoon and she had a flashback. It was, she spent years of her life preparing for revenge. So I think the issue then is one of PTSD, of what the trauma of having to hide under her friends' bodies and feel them grow cold, and the homeless and all the trauma that she then experienced is the defense that you're going to offer. And I think it's in the realm of an insanity defense, but I also think it's just a little bit different, going for a delusional mindset of, that the goal was revenge was her option for seeking justice for all those who she loved that died. It's the argument. I think it's the best argument. Would really need to research it on how to pull that off. I do think it would be a good mock trial for us to do. And but I'm just sick and twisted that way.
Yeah.
Stephen, you got that look in your eye. What do you think, buddy?
Well, the only other thing I can think of is duress. And it wouldn't, but there's a couple of major problems with that, of course, duress is never a defense to murder. So you can never justify killing someone else because you thought you were going to be killed. But it can be a defense to other crimes. But the other big problem is that the threat to yourself, like in other words, you have to feel like you are in immediate danger. You or yourself are in immediate danger if you don't do this bad thing. So that might work for some of the crimes where she's in the presence of the Grand Inquisitor, for example, if she feels like she might, if she shows any weakness, if she falters, that she might be injured or killed, then that might work. But when she's like kind of off doing her own thing, like when she's chasing Luke, there's no immediate threat to her. So that's kind of a stretch too. But yeah, and also, we're sort of talking about affirmative defenses, which are obviously the best way to knock out criminal charges. But also as the stuff we're talking about with kind of like background and trauma and responses, that can also play an important role in an advocate's job during sentencing. And so it not maybe just getting the punishment more focused on sort of restorative things and not so much the punishment, if there's sort of extenuating factors, of course.
So Bethany, if you were a juror and you heard those arguments of, the prosecution slam dunk, she spent years planning to kidnap a child in order to get to Kenobi, in order to murder Vader. And along that path, she maims people. She's probably killed people in order to get there. Would you be sympathetic to that defense of she was so traumatized is why she thought all of those wrongs were not wrong?
I would be sympathetic, but I don't think that would lead me to say that she did not deserve time behind bars.
Four-person Bethany reading the verdict of the jury. They have it.
Yeah, we can go back in time in our history with Nazis being prosecuted for war crimes, and just because they were ordered to do so, or they underwent trauma, or even when they were terrified for their own lives, there's not a carte blanche to just commit crimes, even when you're in that kind of a setting.
But I think there's a difference between following an unlawful order, which is, the Nuremberg situation of, you knew what you were doing was wrong and you did it anyway. So orders be damned, you don't get to do that. To the trauma situation that we have here, and someone doing a years-long campaign to try to kill one person, and she racks up, we're presuming she racks up a body count along the way. She definitely has a bunch of attempts. And there is at least one person with missing a hand. So like there's, I mean, she does openly commit battery. We see that a lot. So if she does end up with jail time, I do think she would escape a death sentence. But if she gets out after, say, 20 years, there's the atonement side. And like none of us are theologians here, but I do think that's the interesting issue for, you did something horrible. What do you do after that? After realizing I don't want to be that person anymore and I can do better.
Tala says, now I do this, you know, because she tries to fix, like she can't fix what happened for her, but she can maybe fix things for other people.
Yeah.
And I think that that, you know, we're the audience of Star Wars, you know, not a lot of us have hopefully committed crimes against other people, but all of us have done things that we regret, and all of us have said things that we wish we hadn't said, and maybe we've even done things that we think are unforgivable, or that other people have told us are unforgivable. But it's sort of what the uplifting message of Star Wars is, that especially when you see it with a character like Reva, is that no one's beyond asking for forgiveness and trying to fix what happened, and it's just such a powerful message. It's such a good balm in these rocky times to feel that spark of you know, of Obi-Wan's kindness and his willingness to extend forgiveness and to help put people on a path to atone for what they've done. And I hope we get more Reva. I would love to see what happens to her next. I would love to see what that journey is for her.
Can I say one more thing in mitigation for her?
Oh yeah.
She finally put the bad boss from the Crate Dragon meat processing plant in his place.
Oh, that was that guy. You're right.
Yeah. You got something to say, guys.
Smash the cup out of his hand.
With the Force, yeah, there's a yes.
I totally didn't connect that character. That's amazing.
Yeah, he learned, maybe I should make some changes. I mean, like there's very few TV shows or movies that have someone get sense slapped into them. This might be one of those examples of, whoa, he did have some sense knocked into him. But yes, this Kenobi's empathy, there's thought there from, you know, it's at the end of with the fight with Anakin, or Vader, depending on your point of view. And I mean, this is superb acting with, okay, give me sad, give me tearing, and then apologize. So masterfully done. So I, again, love what they did. But yes, I would like more Reva. I would like more Roken. I'd like more Haja. And, you know, do we get to see them 6 years down the line by the time of Andor? That would be interesting. And
Roken's just getting started, as he said.
Yeah.
Does the path turn into the rebellion? And I don't know, but I'm sure some story writer does. And so closing thoughts. So let's go around the horn alphabetically by first name. So Bethany.
So I mean, I think that the season ended with quite the bang, and I'm going to go back to Christine's comments on the duel. Well, everyone I think was in agreement. That was so incredible and breathtaking. Actually, I definitely rewatched the duel multiple times. But yeah, I'm very interested to see the progress of the characters, and Reva has a special place in my heart as sort of cold as I might have sounded as a potential like member of the jury. It's she has such pull as a character. Like you can see in ways how broken she is and how much she wants to atone. And I think most people can identify with that. It's very, very few people are without life regrets of some kind. And so it's easy to see that reflected in her. But for her, it's the vast majority of her life that she's looking back on, that she has doubts if she will ever be able to overcome it. You know, has she turned into the person that she's been trying to essentially get revenge on, get justice against her entire life?
Yeah. Revenge is not justice, but
yeah, and I think she conflated the two, and right up until the very end.
oh, killing a child, maybe this is a horrible idea. What have I become? But she stops, and that's just brilliantly done. Christine, your thoughts?
Yeah, I enjoyed getting to know Obi-Wan in a different way from the Clone Wars or the prequels. They present a really different picture of him in this series, and I thought it was really interesting. I liked watching the trajectory of him going from feeling defeated to regaining his strength and regaining his confidence, and then wanting to get back into the fight. So I think Bethany's comments earlier about the idea of the mission still being the mission, right? Like it's, you suffered a setback, you suffered a loss, but that doesn't mean that you're going to give up. And, definitely it continues. And I think that is partly why I continue to think that there's a special duty and a special relationship between Ben and the two kids. I mean, he's really in the best position to protect them, having spent significant time with both their parents and his past experiences as a Jedi. And he's, it's comforting to know he's always there in the background, keeping watch over them.
Yeah,
Stephen?
Agreed. I think that as I was thinking about the series, that maybe Obi-Wan and Leia are two of the least polarizing characters in the Star Wars universe. I think everyone can agree that they're awesome characters. And the fact that they centered those two characters together, I think was kind of a masterstroke. It was genius. And, I'm all for Star Wars, exploring other timelines, exploring other parts of the Star Wars saga, and maybe not always coming back to the Skywalkers, but gosh, when they can do it so successfully and make those stories so much richer by seeing kind of a backstory that we didn't know before, I'm all for it. And I really enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, I definitely want more, and I would love to see a season 2. They would just take their time and figure out the story that needs to be told. And because there's 9 years of time that they can explore, and if he gets to see 11-year-old, yeah, cool. Again, it goes to what do you tell Luke when you later, but I'd be very happy to see that. And I'm also very grateful for what we have in fandom right now. We're gonna have Bad Batch season 2 soon, and we're gonna have Andor on August 31. Lucky. I remember in the early 90s when the Heir to the Empire books came out and people were ecstatic. So we're getting Star Wars multiple times a year in live action animation, and it's good. So I'm very grateful for the world that we have right now. And lots of legal analysis we get to discuss. On that note, all of us will be at Comic-Con. Can't say what we're doing yet, but there could be similar things that we discuss. So stay tuned for about 2 weeks before the show when the schedule goes public, but we will be there. We have multiple outlines and prep to do. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And get ready for a rockin' good time. So for that, with everyone, stay safe, stay healthy. We're not completely out of the woods yet, so wear your mask and use hand sanitizer, and stay geeky. We will see you all soon.